Welcome to Innovation Dialogue. I'm Diana Ding.
My voice.
My story.
My dream.
Innovation Dialogue.
We are encouraged by their story.
I'm Rebecca Fannin with Silicon Dragon, and I also contribute to Forbes. I'd like to welcome you to our panel about starting globally with early stage capital. We have a host of experts here to help us go through this topic, and I'd like to introduce them. David Su from Angel Camp, Amit Shah from Artiman Ventures, Peter Su, partner at Dentons, and have we Lux Capital here as well?
Shahin Farshchi. It's hard to pronounce.
Right. Okay. I know you were running a little bit late, so good. Glad we're all here. So I want to talk a little bit about this topic to. In the beginning, talking about China companies going global. In the beginning, most of them were really just staying put in their home market, same with India. But now we're starting to see Chinese and Indian companies and other Asian companies coming into the U.S. And going global much sooner. Do you think that this is a smart strategy or not?
So at Artiman, we invest in U.S. and India, and we have two models. One is investing in U.S. companies and taking them first to Asia to get global customers. And the other model is we invest in India, and we invest in India to take them global from there. And in the India model, what we are seeing, since we addressed the issue of those companies, we are focused on healthcare. And within the healthcare sector, we are basically focused on bringing sort of leading-edge technologies and then developing business models to scale first in India and then leveraging them. So we have companies, we have 4 companies in healthcare where we have now spread from India to Middle East to Africa, Southeast Asia, and a little bit of China. And what we are finding is the desire for healthcare at a world level quality is extremely high. But how you do it and what it takes to kind of get those global channels going is where it's interesting. But we've had some initial success. In the U.S. companies going up overseas, we've had about 5 companies do that, where the first customers were not in the U.S. They were either in China, India, Middle East, or elsewhere, and then they've scaled from there.
So it sounds like it was a smart strategy for these companies to go global from the start, based upon the success that you're seeing of their progress.
So far, so good, yes.
So far, so good. All right. And from a lawyer's perspective, what are the risks of going global from the very beginning? Are there risks, and what should startup founders be aware of if they're going to try to do this? Because it seems like it's a very bold move to go global from the start.
Okay. Maybe I can expand from the prior question and then I'll kind of transition to this question. So I think I completely agree with what you said, which I just came back from China actually over the weekend, and I'll say, there are certainly entrepreneurs in China now. These are now serial entrepreneurs, if you will, like what we have in Silicon Valley. And these entrepreneurs have a lot of international experience. And so I think there are now entrepreneurs in China that starting company that have international experience, and they're looking to have the product that actually kind of go global. So I think in terms of the for this early stage company going global, in terms of some of the legal considerations or risk. I think initially they're kind of looking at financing and then also IP risk. So I think financing is in terms of where they're going to be sourcing the funds, how they're going to structure the company, whether they're going to have a company in China, a company in Silicon Valley, whether money is going to go direct into the U.S. or go to some other offshore entity. for sort of tax reasons. So I think in terms of the corporate structure, they'll kind of think about that. And then the other part of it, I think, will become increasingly more of an issue would be sort of the IP risk. If you have team in the U.S., you have team in China, then in terms of U.S. have very restrictive IP regulations in terms of the export control and then also the trade secrets. And so I think, in terms of that aspect, in terms of the exchange of the information, I think that's going to complicate the free flow of information. And then also the placement of the IP, whether you're going to place the IP in China or US, that will impact subsequently as you try to license your IP.
So the two main things to think about if you're going global from a legal perspective would be the IP protection and the structure of the company. And is the Cayman Islands structure still really popular for foreign companies going into China?
Cayman is a very popular structure from a financing perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think if your investors coming from China, then usually there's a structure you can set up in Cayman, which is more tax efficient. But in terms of the IP, you can actually set it up whether in Cayman or you can set it up in another lower tax jurisdiction.
Or Mauritius.
Mauritius or sort of your favorite islands or Hong Kong, Singapore.
Okay, good. From Lux Capital's perspective, you have portfolio companies that are doing this, going global from the start, and if so, how are they doing?
So just really quickly, Lux Capital is a venture capital firm. We've been around for 15 years, invested in over 100 companies over the course of 5 funds. We're managing a little bit over $1 billion. Current fund is $400 million, and we cut $5 to $15 million checks to lead early financings, and the goal is to help build iconic multi-billion-dollar companies going after massive markets. Prefacing with that, all of our companies are globally minded. All of our companies have operations across the world. In fact, one of my companies were at a board meeting yesterday, and they had bubbles showing the team members that are located in different countries, and this bubble was all over. There were bubbles all over the slide. So they had probably people in 8 different countries, ranging from Korea, China, all the way out to Germany, Australia, and obviously the U.S. I think all companies all over the world should be thinking globally, at least all the companies that want to scale vastly. I think there are some business models that are more conducive to local markets, and that depends on regulation or economies of scale. But if you look at companies like DJI, they're great examples of companies that have started in Asia and have been able to dominate globally. Right. And from Angel Camp's perspective, we have our latecomer here, David from Angel Camp. From Angel Camp's perspective, what about you're dealing with angel investment stage companies? So are those companies actually ready to go global?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm late, and I come from China, but my English is so poor, so excuse me, please. Yeah, in China, people invest in one field, such as O2O, and now it is AI. In every city and every new company said there are AI companies. In the future, maybe all companies are AI companies, but now maybe it isn't. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are there particular technology sectors where it's easier to go global?
So at Artiman, we invest in what we call white spaces, and so we are not in your traditional arenas. We try to intersect technology with new markets. So, for example, we have a construction company. In fact, their first client is Li Ka-shing's foundation in China, and we are building all of his hospitals. We have another company which is in healthcare, where we took some of the leading diagnostics technology in the U.S. It's a company called Core Diagnostics, and we have now expanded to all the self-service and self-pay markets in Asia, because in the U.S., a lot of the medical companies have massive challenges of regulatory and then insurance approvals. So what we are finding is you have to find the different market segments and the different technologies which make sense. If it's too much of a leading tech, then there is an adoption issue. They still look to the US for the adoption, and then they will follow. But if it's applying into regular businesses, they're absolutely willing to adopt a lot faster.
Okay. And from Lux Capital, what do you think? Are there particular technologies that would scale more easily globally?
Sure. So pretty much every type of investment that we do has a global perspective. So we've funded everything from basic materials and technologies all the way to semiconductors and electronics, to digital health and manufacturing automation, 3D printing, 3D scanning, driverless cars, rockets, satellites, drones. And all of these technologies have a global angle to them. And in fact, when we make these investments, part of the pitch has to do with how they're going to be leveraging the best resources from all over the world, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's access to materials, whether it's access to technical talent. And we're finding that technical talent, in fact, to be global as well as the U.S. Particular technology areas that I'm personally very excited about. I'm very excited about the future of human-machine interfaces. I'm very excited about driverless cars, obviously. We led the seed round in Zoox, which is right down the street here, which is reinventing the car from scratch with the intent of offering an autonomous taxi service to consumers, again, globally. Very interested in AI. In fact, I had a company just right now in my office doing manufacturing automation using reinforcement learning. So basically by watching a worker do something.
So pretty much all of these technologies you say can scale globally.
Absolutely.
Okay, no differences in degrees?
So I think there are some, I think technology by nature is a global it's a global, technology by nature is global. I think there are certain services and certain products that are specific to certain geographies by virtue of regulation and policy and perhaps some cultural aspects. But I think,
such as, what comes to mind when you say that?
So digital health comes to mind. So in the case of digital health, you are very, very much impacted by policy, unless you're a consumer app. If you're, let's say, for example, doing telemedicine, or if you're doing prescription drug delivery, you're very much impacted by local rules and regulations. So that probably, we have a company called Home Team, which is providing senior and assisted living care to seniors. So there's very specific local regulations that govern that business. So that perhaps isn't a cookie cutter type of company that you can just go ahead and apply everywhere. But when you're talking about basic technology, for example, manufacturing automation, so long as you meet certain safety requirements, which is global, again, there's global impact there.
Right. Okay. So as VCs and angel investors, would you invest in a founder who comes to pitch to you and says, I just want to stay in my home market for now, because the home market is big enough, it's difficult enough to manage this, to start up, to scale. Would you invest in a company that tells you we want to stay local in our home market for the time being and then maybe go global later? What do you think? Will you invest in that company or turn them down?
Yeah, I think in China we need the people who really master AI. There are very many investors invest in AI companies, but most of them don't really know what is AI. I have talked with Joey, the manager partner of KPCB, and now he found his new fund. He said, if one don't really master AI, he invest only for love. But as a professional investor, love is not enough.
So let's say this AI company, they want to just stay in China. Will you invest in them?
Yeah.
If they just want to stay in China?
Most of them in fintech and
in fintech.
And technology. The most invest more AI companies. The fund is Fan. His founder is Xu Xiaoping.
Sure.
We talk about his teacher Xu.
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. So those are fintech and also AR. Those are areas that have gone global very fast. And it used to be that, there was this whole mystique, we won't invest outside of the 30-mile radius of Silicon Valley, we need to stay local, we need to work with them hands-on. Now that really seems to have changed a lot. So the question to both of the VCs here on the panel, would you invest in a company that still wants to stay local or regional?
We have invested in companies that are, outside the U.S. and are operating locally for reasons that have to do with the business that make them advantaged in that case. And so even though it's our preference to be close to the founders that we're partnering up with to make ourselves more available and be value add, there are cases when it's advantageous to be in their local markets. And we as venture capitalists are solving for generating massive enterprise value more so than investing in our backyards.
Okay.
I think we are a little more cautious. We have over the last 5 years, expanded to investing pretty much all over the US, but that took us a lot of effort. We definitely invest in a local market in India. We've just started forming partnerships in China where we feel comfortable at early stages, where if we have the right partners, we will invest. But again, for those companies, we would not focus on China market. We don't bring any value. But if it's a Chinese company which is wanting to expand into India and US, you're pretty much addressing 80% of GDP, then we are very interested.
Yeah, but maybe I can just kind of add to it. So, I think that's sort of the question that people were asking, and I think before. But like I said, actually recently, I think in terms of the Chinese market, you actually have these serial entrepreneurs, successful Chinese entrepreneurs that actually have sort of a global perspective. And I think in terms of their proposition when they come to the VCs for early stage, I mean, they are initially, I think when we talk about global, I think you have to think of the sequence, right? We're not doing global simultaneously. So I think they are kind of focused on maybe doing China first, but then there's an eye toward really expanding sort of their technology into US and then into Europe. So I think that is one of the things that's really changing in China, that you're getting more and more entrepreneurs in China that's just equally good as the entrepreneurs in the US that have an international perspective.
So there are very few success stories of US companies in China. You go down the list, maybe Airbnb, Apple, there's companies outside tech like Ford. Microsoft is a success, but there are very few success stories and many, many failures. So if these big corporate giants from the U.S. can't make it in China, then and other markets, then, and in particular in China, why would a startup even dare to go down that road?
So I think the onus is on the startup to find the right local partner. I think being able to navigate that market is probably as important, if not more important, than the original business plan. So if we're funding a team and they have the ambition to go to China, then the question is, okay, who's your partner? What's your strategy? And that has absolutely nothing to do with the technology and the product that they're going after in local markets. So if they can't figure that part out, then I would not support doing that before doing their homework first.
What's the best way to find a good partner, though?
Maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll probably even take one step further. I think finding a partner, people have been saying that. I would say, nowadays, I think for some of the opportunities in China, you really need to put them at the equal footing. Okay, you need to treat them as like they are just as capable as we are, and finding somebody that I guess to be a true partner to somebody, and then who actually really understand the Chinese market, because I think that is part of the reason why the U.S. company have not been successful, whether because of the Chinese government or because they didn't understand the culture, that there's a tendency in China to have the consumer to drive certain behavior, which actually sometimes may be different from the U.S. And therefore, if you have somebody that truly is part of your integrated team that can penetrate the market, rather than thinking that, you're just somebody who will just extending to get into the market.
Yeah, like a lot of people talk about the eBay example where they were entering China, but they were managing it from California. So that there are lessons learned along the way that you need to have local management, you need to find the good partner. Again, how do you find this good partner? I mean, if you're sitting here in Silicon Valley and you're trying to get into Beijing, what's the first step? How do you get into it? How do you find a partner you can trust?
Come to events like this.
So we have not had a company go directly without first having customers here into China. We've had companies go to India directly. The one company which was the exception, which was the construction company, it just so happened that we knew the right people in the Li Ka-shing Foundation. And that made a big difference. So we have a fair number of Chinese customers now. But that was, I think, luck rather than any strategy.
Okay. Are you pushing your portfolio companies to go global faster, to scale up? I mean, because today it seems like it's a lot about speed. And, the first winner wins the market, dominates. You see that in China and India.
Yeah.
So are you pushing them?
Well, there are two sectors, or three sectors that at least I know both Lux and Artiman invest in, which is related to materials, manufacturing, construction, life sciences. And all these markets, the global markets, are actually larger than the US market in terms of rate of adoption. So absolutely, we are definitely, for those sectors, we are definitely pushing. But if I were to invest, which we have, in a security company, the first place is US still. We would go to the other countries second.
From India?
No, but if it was the US. But we have US companies which we've invested in materials, where the first customers we are looking at are international.
Okay.
So in certain sectors, we believe the market is much larger outside.
Okay.
By the way, I wouldn't use, I try to think that I don't push my founders, I encourage my founders to do...
Maybe the wrong word.
To be their best.
Persuade.
Persuade. So, yes. But, we don't try to encourage founders to do things. I mean, there's no playbook in this business. If there was a playbook, then there would have been an algorithm that would use reinforcement learning to make investments and manage companies, and I wouldn't be sitting here. There would be like a cursor sitting here, a computer sitting here instead. So, we try to draw upon experiences that we've had with our previous companies and experiences that our other companies are undergoing in our portfolios. But at the end, we try to avoid, encouraging companies, pushing companies to go global for the sake of going global. I think it's really important for them to get their product right, build up their team, build up an operation, and if they're at a point where it makes sense, then it makes sense, but we absolutely don't want to push them to go global for the sake of going global.
Do these companies that are eyeing global operations, do they need more venture capital in order to do that or not? Because often there's lower cost if you are going outside of these expensive markets like Silicon Valley. Do they need extra venture capital to do the global expansion? Or go global from the beginning?
I think it's always prudent for companies that are looking to go into new territories, to the earlier comments that were made, to find the right partners, and partner equals significant partner, equal partner, and to find the right, and I think investors, local investors would also be helpful, not just in extending runway, but local investors who can help the companies with finding the right people to work with them, and collaborators, and helping them, point out the obstacles, help with the regulatory landscape. I think that would be very valuable. So finding investors on the ground is something that I would recommend.
What are some of the mistakes that you've seen among your portfolio companies when they've gone into China or India or somewhere else, another major market like that?
Not understanding the local ecosystem and the difficulty of cracking any market. Presuming the behavior is the same as the US market, presuming that adoption rates are similar. There's a lot of mistakes. And the mistakes are typically because there are cultural and structural differences that people don't internalize before they go to that.
Do you think it helps to learn the local language, like Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook learning Chinese? Is that a huge help for Facebook in China?
We can't use Facebook in China. In China, most of AI companies are early stage companies, and in technology we learn and follow US. But it is easy to have big data in China. I think it is the one no strength for China.
Right. Well, social media is definitely one of those tricky areas for China. And we'll have to see how Facebook eventually does in China, and whether that might open up some other startup opportunities in China. India is not an issue in that case.
So if I can explain,
Yeah.
in terms of the Chinese companies' hurdle or risk or business costs in
Yeah.
coming into the U.S. is in terms of the litigation exposure. True or not, it's when they come to the U.S., they have to be ready for litigation. I mean, I represent Silicon Valley startup for a long time, and every startup I represent, I always say, if you become successful, you will be sued. Okay, that's just facts of life in Silicon Valley. And so for Chinese company, when they enter the U.S. market, that is a major consideration for them.
It's hard being that very successful company because you become a target almost, right? Well, one of the interesting things that I learned traveling back and forth between China and India and Silicon Valley is I learned, of course, WeChat in China. But then when I got to India, it was all about WhatsApp. So, you have to be in the market to realize some of these key differences. And as soon as I got on WhatsApp, then my whole market, my whole field opened up in India, but it was never going to open up using WeChat or email. Email is just basically dead in many of these international markets. So are there any other examples like that you can think of? Oh my God, what a mistake it would have been if I would have tried to do something that I knew that worked in Silicon Valley.
I think
Even from your personal experience, not just your portfolio companies.
Yeah, I wouldn't single out China or Asia. I think most products don't quite translate as is. I think many of us, especially technology people, I'm an academic by training, you think that, okay, if you're solving a problem, then you're solving everybody's problem. Well, that's absolutely not true. And so I think everyone, when they're entering any market, needs to be mindful of that culture, of that regulatory landscape, of the adoption cycles, and I think that whole process needs to be reevaluated for any country, including China.
Any questions from the audience? And if you would identify yourself and just speak loudly, since any questions?
Don't be shy.
IP protection, risk, talent, team. Okay, no question. Foreign language.
Folks are hungry, like me.
Yeah, everybody's hungry. Do you have to like the local food? Yes, you have to learn to love the local food. Yes. No. You need to come up here. Can you pass him the mic?
You folks were thanks. You guys were talking about finding a partner in a local market like China or India to make that transition. And I'm curious if you could talk about whether corporations make good partners in that instance.
Well, that's a good question.
The answer is yes and no. So if I speak for India a little bit, maybe actually just stepping back, if you look at India versus China, there's a subtle difference. India is more open, but the regulatory and the business environment is more complex. So what that means is you have a lot more friction on things that you would not have expected friction in. But you don't have to worry about IP, you don't have to worry about, China has made a decision that there's a whole bunch of technologies that they want to own, and they want to make sure that there's a lot of local sort of base that is developed as a result. India doesn't care. So you have an Amazon in India which is dominating, you have Facebook dominating, so they don't care about that. But the issue is, from a business standpoint, there's a friction set. A lot of the enterprises in India were very traditional and very old-fashioned with very little R&D. So partnering with some of them and trying to do sort of a tech kind of channel sale is not quite easy. And so you have to find the right partners. There are a lot of younger groups and younger companies which are a lot more progressive and aggressive. Second issue is, I think, really making sure that the product is appropriately adopted for that market, including price points. We see this in healthcare. A lot of US diagnostic companies want to offer it at $5,000 and $10,000, whereas an average price point in India is $500 to $800. But the volumes are different if you get it to that point. So there's a way that you have to approach it which is a little different. I would not approach it as a cookie cutter pattern.
Okay, I'm getting a message here very loud and clear on this monitor here. Time's up! So let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Thank you.